Busch Beer will sponsor Trackhouse and Ross Chastain starting in 2024. LaJoie is finalizing a multi-year contract extension with Spire Motorsports, and it looks like NASCAR will be going to Canada in 2024. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to the video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead and start to talk about the Richmond Cup Series race, as they have a title sponsor, and that title sponsor is going to be called the Cookout 400. Now, Cookout does sponsor the Southern 500, so they'll have 2 races within a 4 to 5 week period, which is something you don't normally see. Nonetheless, glad to see the Cookout will sponsor the Richmond Cup Series race. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Mavis Tire and Brakes. As it was announced a day or two ago that Mavis Tire and Brakes will sponsor Denny Hamlin for 5 races in 2023. They'll sponsor him at Loudon this weekend, then they'll sponsor him at Pocono next week, then they'll sponsor him at Richmond, then Michigan, then Watkins Glen. So basically 5 weeks in a row, they're going to sponsor Denny Hamlin. The paint scheme, in my opinion, does not look that great and good, but it's really cool to see, nonetheless, a new company come into sport. I don't believe Mavis Tire and Brakes has ever sponsored a Cup Series car, so nonetheless, it's really cool and awesome to see that they are going to sponsor pretty awesome stuff, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Goodyear. As it was reported by Adam Stern, I believe, on Wednesday afternoon, that according to an SVJ poll, Goodyear is the most recognized sponsor in NASCAR, with Coca-Cola being second. That's not a surprise. Goodyear is a big and really huge company, and a lot of people know what the Goodyear brand is. It's been in NASCAR for a very long time, so it's not a surprise or a shock to see that Goodyear is the most recognized sponsor. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Eric Brennan. As it was announced yesterday that Eric Brennan is going to begin calling ARCA races this weekend at Iowa. For those who do not know, Eric Brennan has been working with the Cars Tour, and from what I've heard, Eric Brennan is actually a really good commentator with the Cars Tour. So this is a really good opportunity for Eric. I've said this in no disrespect to Jamie Little, but Jamie Little does not do the greatest job as a commentator. She does a really good job as a pit reporter, don't get me wrong. She does bring energy there, but I just feel like with the booth, she just seems like she's going through the motions and doesn't do a good job. My hope with Eric Brennan is he can eventually become the lead commentator if he does a good enough job this week in Iowa. I'm definitely going to be tuning in to see how he does. Hopefully he can do a really good job as a lead commentator, because he needs to do a good job, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Rev TV Canada. Now, a lot of people wonder, where are the races for the SRX going to be broadcast for the SRX? Well, it was announced, I think, on Wednesday that Rev TV Canada will actually, on Monday, that Rev TV Canada will broadcast the SRX in Canada. This is really cool to see. I think Rev TV is an up-and-coming company, if I'm not mistaken, in Canada. So it's really cool to see that they're going to be broadcasting the SRX race in Canada. Of course, the SRX kicks off this season and this week, on tomorrow actually, and we're looking forward to the broadcast for the SRX there. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the SRX once again. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern, I believe, yesterday, that the SRX believes that they will get some huge promotion with ESPN. They'll get some stuff on SportsCenter, and they'll have some post-race show, I believe, with Scott Van Pelt. Obviously, the SRX is moving over to ESPN in 2023. Like I just said a second ago, it will be broadcast tomorrow night on ESPN. There's a lot of great things going on with the SRX. They've got a great driver lineup that's going to be there this year, and I feel like that ESPN, there's been a little promotion, not as much I thought there was going to be, but the hope is every single week can get some really good promotion and some great racing along with that as well. There's a lot of excitement around the SRX this year, and hopefully there'll be great promotion from ESPN on their front, because it'll be really cool for them to have fantastic promotion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Dale Jr. Now, I think it was Ryan Austin who actually reported on this on Twitter, but Dale Jr. actually, on an Ask Jr. download segment before they did the actual podcast, Dale Jr. actually explained the Hendrick number debacle. Now, interestingly, the number 88 was not the original number that they were going to go with. The number that Dale Jr. actually wanted was the number 28. Which I find very interesting. Obviously, I think the 28 car was with Robert Yates Racing at the time back in 2008, because Robert Yates Racing was around in the 2008 season, but they left in the early portion of 2009. But obviously, the number 28 was not available at the time, so that's why Junior went with the 88. I find it very interesting. I find it very creative, and overall crazy to think that we could have had a number 28 Dale Jr. car. Obviously, the 8 was not available because Teresa was holding on to that, and I think Dale would have liked to keep the 8. But I think it's interesting to see that Dale Jr. wanted to to bring the 28 car. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the 2023 Slinger Nationals. Now, last night, of course, was the 2023 Slinger Nationals. This race, I believe, was dominated by Luke Fenhouse, but it came down to a late restart, and it was actually won by Ty Majeski, who passed Luke Fenhouse on the restart and picked up, I think, his third or fourth Slinger Nationals victory. Huge congratulations to Ty Majeski. Ty Majeski, of course, competing for Truck Series Championship this year with ThorSport Racing. He had a very, very great night. He's a good late model racer as well. So he's won some big late model races, and hopefully he can take that momentum going to next week at Pocono, the truck race, and can win there. Notables, Matt Kens, unfortunately, he, I think, wrecked out or basically went to the garage. Chase Elliott, I believe, finished in 6th or 7th. He had a pretty strong run, but was not as good as a leader. I think Eric Jones finished in the top 10 as well. So overall, the Slinger Nationals went really, really well. And nonetheless, congratulations to Ty Majeski on picking up the victory and getting a well-deserved and respected victory. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Jeffrey Earnhardt. As it was reported by Toby Christie that Jeffrey Earnhardt will not race at New Hampshire this weekend. Instead, Gray Van Alst, who actually made his Xfinity Series debut with Alpha Prime Racing this past week in Atlanta, will drive in the 45 car once again with the team this upcoming week at New Hampshire. It's really interesting because Jeffrey Earnhardt was supposed to be full-time with Alpha Prime Racing this season, but after failing to qualify a few weeks ago at the Chicago Street Course, I wonder if the agreement fell through. Obviously, Jeffrey does have sponsorship running for Forever Lawn, so it is a little disappointing to see that he's not going to be running this weekend, but I would have to imagine it's due to the performance because he's had, because let's be honest, Jeffrey has struggled in the 2023 season. There's a lot of rumors about Jeffrey's future at this moment, but it sounds like, and right now, he will not run this upcoming weekend at New Hampshire. Gray Van Alst is going to be that driver who's going to take over. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Caden Honeycutt. As it was announced yesterday that Caden Honeycutt will drive the 44 for Nice Motorsports in a week or two at Pocono. Caden Honeycutt, for those who don't know, is a really talented up-and-coming driver who's ran quite a few Truck Series races in the 2023 season. He drove for Rover Racing, did a really solid job with that team, competing for top 5s and top 10s, and also has ran a couple other races with other teams as well, and has gotten the best out of equipment. I think Caden Honeycutt will actually do really good with Nice Motorsports. I think he'll get the best out of equipment. This, of course, will be the first time that the 44 truck has ran this season, so he will have to qualify his way in, but I think he's easily going to qualify his way in, and I wouldn't surprise or shock me if he's competing for the overall victory. Granted, we haven't seen the truck race, but I do think that Caden Honeycutt will have a chance and a shot to compete for the overall victories. I think he's a really solid and a great driver overall, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Simon Pagenaud. As it was announced yesterday that Simon Pagenaud has not been medically cleared to race this weekend at Toronto. The driver who will substitute for him is the driver who drives Survivor Shanks Racing Inns organization who's been testing IndyCar, Tom Blomqvist. Obviously, for those who did not watch the race in Mid-Ohio, Simon Pagenaud was not cleared to race there, and Connor Daly substitute for him after a really, really scary and a bad crash that took place, basically going to turn number 4, basically in the sand trap. He flipped, I think, 9 or 10 times. He said he felt fine, but IndyCar has not medically cleared him. I am actually a little surprised Simon Pagenaud is not going to be racing this weekend, but I do respect IndyCar's decision to be better to be safe than sorry in regards to that situation. But I think this is also nonetheless a really good opportunity for Tom Blomqvist because I think Tom Blomqvist is a really talented driver. He was one of the big reasons why Meyershank Racing's gone on to win back-to-back races, even though there's a little bit of controversy around the 2023 Rolex 24 victory. He's a driver I think is extremely talented and I think could win some races in the future in any series. So this is a great opportunity for Tom. It's unfortunate the circumstances had to play out the way they did, but it's really cool to see that he'll get an opportunity. I'm wishing Simon Pagenaud the best luck, and hopefully he'll get back behind the wheel really, really soon. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Advent Health. As it was basically reported, we'll talk about Busch Beer here in a little bit, but according to rumors and reports, Advent Health has actually begun to talk to teams for 2024 as their contract with Trackhouse ends at the end of the 2023 season. Obviously, Advent Health has been working with Trackhouse and basically Roche and things since, or really Chip Ganassi, because remember, Trackhouse did buy up the Chip Ganassi Racing Cup operation. But Advent Health has been working with these teams for a very, very long time. My big question is going to be, what teams are they going to work with in the future? Well, my guess is there's a few teams they could end up working with. Number one, I can see them going to work with Rich Schultz Racing and maybe potentially sponsoring Kyle Busch. Obviously, Kyle Busch doesn't have a lot of sponsorship and a lot of funding outside of some of the RCR partners, but I would imagine Av Health might work with Kyle Busch, who's having a really strong season in 2023. I think they could go and work with other drivers in the future. It's going to be very interesting to see what Av Health decides to do past 2023 season, but overall, not surprising or shocking that they're looking to maybe go work with somebody else, especially with the Busch Beer sponsorship announcement we'll get into here in just a little bit. But overall, Avon Health is going to be looking to work with other teams. Maybe they go sponsor Henry Motorsports, maybe work with Kyle Larson or Chase Elliott perhaps. That could be a potential possibility as well. But I think that they're going to stay in the Chevy realm. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Daniel Ricciardo. Now, these are originally rumors and reports, but it was officially confirmed yesterday morning that Daniel Ricciardo will replace Nick DeVries at AlphaTauri effective immediately and will run with AlphaTauri the rest of the 2023 season. Now, Daniel Ricciardo last year basically left McLaren and became the reserve driver for Red Bull, becoming the third driver. With how good his tests were and how much Nick DeVries has struggled, they decided to go ahead and make a decision to put Daniel Ricciardo in the rest of the season. Now, I do want to get my thoughts and opinions on this. I do not agree with this decision overall. I understand that Daniel Ricciardo is a great driver and a really, really talented driver. However, I feel like this is a really, really harsh move, considering the fact that Nick DeVries did not even complete a full season. I get that Nick DeVries is 28 years old, but you shouldn't have expected him to come in there and fix the team, considering they have been the worst team on the F1 circuit so far in 2023. Williams is faster than them, and Haas is faster than them. They used to be a solid team, but you got to look at the drivers. And Yuki Tsunoda has not been much better this year than Nick DeVries. I think this is a very, very harsh move. I do get that Yuki is a way younger driver. I think Yuki's 22 or 23 years of age. But still, Yuki's not done much better either. And he's only gotten 2 points this year. So I really don't get this move. I get Ricciardo. You want to put Ricciardo and give him a shot at opportunity. But overall, I just don't 100% agree with this decision. I think they're making a little bit of an overstretch of the move. And I think they're just seeing the fact that they struggle. But they got to look at the team themselves and fix their issues there. I think it's more of a team problem than a driver problem. And I think that they're making a little bit of an overstretch. But it's cool to see nonetheless Dan Ricciardo is back in Formula 1. Hopefully he can do a good job and make these cars better. But I do think that he's not going to do much better because AlphaTauri is not that good of an organization at this moment. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Dillon. As it was announced yesterday that Austin Dillon will drive the 10 for Kaulig Racing this weekend at New Hampshire. I believe Austin Dillon has ran one race so far for Kaulig Racing 2023, and that did come at Auto Club, and I believe finished around the top 10. Now, Austin Dillon obviously has struggled in the Cup Series so far in the 2023 season, only scoring 1 or 2 top 10s up to this point. But he hasn't very solid in the NASCAR Xfinity Series the last couple of years. And I think Austin Dillon could have a good run this weekend with Kaulig Racing. Hopefully he can, because it's like I said, he has struggled in 2023. Hopefully he can get a good run with Kaulig Racing, have a strong run with the team in 2023 this weekend. I'm not sure how many races he's going to run, but nonetheless, good to see he's getting a shot and opportunity to once again race with the team. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Sean Hingorani. Now, there was a lot of questions and rumors on what was going to happen with Sean Hingorani after what he did at Mid-Ohio this past week. Well, ARCA officially made a decision, and it was announced that Sean Hingorani has been suspended for the upcoming race at Iowa Speedway, the ARCA and ARCA East or West combination race, due to the retaliation he had against Dean Thompson. Like I just said a second ago, on the last lap of the race at Mid-Ohio, he decided to go ahead and wreck his own teammate and put him into the sand trap for basically deliberately and wrecking him, which their rules are a little more clear than what NASCAR Cup rules have said. If you try to basically wait for a driver, you're going to get a major, major penalty. I think this is absolutely the right decision, absolutely the right call. Look, I understand that Sean Hingorani is 16 years old, but what he did, in my opinion, was completely unacceptable and uncalled for. Regardless of what level you are in the world of racing, you cannot do this. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that he did that, and I'm glad that they decided to step in and say, you know what, this is the wrong thing you did, you can't do this, and I'm glad that ARCA was like, yeah, even in ARCA, this shit's uncalled for. ARCA needs to step in. I feel like this has been a huge problem at ARCA for a very, very long time. And not every ARCA driver does race like this. But this is a big problem. You've got a lot of kids that do come in here who have a lot of funding and they have a lot of money and they don't race with respect. They have to learn somewhere that you have to race with respect. Look at drivers like Frankie Muniz. Frankie Muniz has been racing clean with a lot of respect out there, and he does everything correctly. And that's why Frankie's second in the points right now, because he races with a lot of respect. And it's just frustrating to see the series go the way it's been going the last few years. It has been considered a rich kid series because it's not the grassroots series everyone talks about. There's things that need to be fixed with ARCA. Hopefully, they can be fixed and things can get better with ARCA going forward. Obviously, I think ARCA this year, the racing itself, I think has actually been pretty good. There's been a lot of good racing I've watched. But again, I feel like there's still issues with it that need to be resolved, and they need to be resolved very, very quickly because you don't want things getting unhinged. Hopefully, things can be fixed in the future, and ARCA can be in a better position long term. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brody Kosecki. As it's been reported over the last few hours that Brody Kosecki might make his NASCAR Cup Series debut in about a month at the Indy Road Course driving for Richard Childress Racing. Now, why could Brody Kosecki make his NASCAR Cup Series debut? Well, he works for Erebus Racing. And if you haven't heard, Erebus Racing has a contract and they have an alliance, I believe, with Joe Gibbs Racing and Richard Childress Racing. Now, Brody Kosecki, for those who do not know, Brody Kosecki is, I believe, leading the championship in Supercars currently at the moment right now. And a lot of people consider him to be as good as Shane Van Gisbergen. And a lot of people are looking at him to have a really good chance to potentially win with Richard Childress Racing because Brody Kosecki, like I said, has that supercar experience. And I think Brody Kosecki could come in there and go on and win. He's got a lot of talent. He's a really, really great driver. And I think he, like I said, could have a chance to go out there and win. Now, obviously, it's not been officially reported at this point. But again, they're looking at him being a teammate with Kyle Busch. And if you're a teammate with Kyle Busch, you're going to get a lot of experience. And also, we do know that recently he was spotted at Gateway when Kyle Busch won that race. He was spotted in the pit box with Richard Childress, indicating there's a good chance that this is going to happen. I think it's a really great move. I really hope it ends up happening, and we'll see what happens with Brody Kosecki. But it sounds like there's a good chance that Brody Kosecki will make his NASCAR Cup Series debut at the Indy Oval in a third Richard Childress Racing car. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Justin Haley. Now, Oscar Nitzke for Sports have put an article out in regards to Justin Haley's future. And obviously, Justin Haley is currently under contract through the 2023 season, but we don't know the future of Justin Haley past 2023. Well, according to rumblings, Justin Haley is likely going to return to College Racing in 2024. Now, according to Chris Rice, who is the president of College Racing, who was on Sirius XM and spoke to Jordan Bianchi, they're hoping to have the decision on their driver lineup by the middle portion of August. So within the next month, they're hoping to have their decision made. Now, according to a lot of people, it is very likely that Justin Haley is going to return to College, and I think College should keep Justin Haley around. I think Justin Haley is a really, really talented driver who always gets the best out of his equipment that he races in, and is having a decent year so far in 2023. His stats are very similar to what they were in 2022. I think Justin Haley would do a really, really good job behind the wheel of College once again. I think the team has been improving, especially over the last couple of weeks. He had a really strong run with the team very, very recently at the Chicago Street Course, and also I think it was really, really doing good at Atlanta as well. I think he's going to do really good if he continues driving for the team, and it sounds like he will likely return to the team, which I think is absolutely the right call. Hopefully, he can do a really good job with the team in the next years and build College to be a stronger team long term. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Indianapolis Oval. Now, over the last couple of months, there's been a lot of rumors and rumors about the Indianapolis Oval potentially returning for 2024 and the Brickyard 400 returning. Well, earlier today on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, Greg Stucker, who is the executive of Goodyear and the president of Goodyear, he went on SiriusXM and says that Indianapolis Oval could return in 2024. And he says that they are actually planning to have a test on the Oval later this year, probably in the later portion of 2023. Now, obviously, like I said, there's been a lot of rumors and a lot of people in the industry have indicated there's a really good chance that the Brickyard 400 could return in 2024. Don't get me wrong, I think running the Indy Road Course the last couple of years was honestly a good idea because honestly the Brickyard 400 had kind of died off. However, with how bad Turn 1 has been the last 2 years especially, I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people want a Brickyard to return. Also, I think a lot of people compare this track to track like Pocono. And a lot of people, including myself, think that Pocono has actually put on some pretty solid racing over the last couple of years, last year, with the next-gen car. So I think a lot of people want to see how the next-gen car races. And if it doesn't race really, really good, they can go back to the road course if they want to, or maybe go to IRP, even though the short track product does need to be worked on, even though they're actually working on that short track product. There's a test coming up in regards to that. But overall, I want to see the Indy Oval come back and the Brickyard 400 to come back. I think a lot of us fans want that. Also, I think there's a lot of road courses on the schedule, and I think an overconsumption on road courses where I think you need to cut some of these road courses off. I think there's been overburdened schedule of road courses. I get why they brought the Indy road course on the schedule because the Xfinity race, the opening one, was really good in 2020. But I feel like the Xfinity package is always better in overall. So it's really interesting to see. It sounds like Indy Oval is likely coming back in the 2024 season. Hopefully it can come back, and it sounds like there's a really good chance it will return in 2024. And there's a test that, like I said, is expected to happen in the near future. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stewart-Haas Racing. Now, I think I talked about this on the channel about a week or two ago, but remember, Josh Berry was announced he'd be driving the 4-car for Stewart-Haas Racing in 2024. And reporters had actually asked questions to Stewart-Haas Racing about their future with Ford because Josh Berry, of course, was driving for Junior Motorsports, has always been a Chevy driver. Now, Tony Stewart did comment to the media, and it sounds very likely at this point that Stewart-Haas Racing is going to remain a Ford team in 2024. Now, interesting thing to note, though, Stewart-Haas Racing's contract with Ford only goes right now through the 2024 season. So it does sound like right now there's a really good chance that after 2024, we could see Stewart-Haas Racing potentially switch manufacturers to another manufacturer if they could potentially possibilities. So what manufacturer could they switch to after 2024? Well, I think they could go back to Chevy. But where would they be on the Chevy pipeline if they were to switch after 2024? Well, I think they'd be out where Trackhouse is, or maybe right behind Trackhouse. But that's the thing. Right now, I think that you look at Chevy, they've got a lot of really strong teams. Obviously, Hendrick Motorsports being the strongest team. They got Trackhouse, and you got College. You got Spire, who's building their program, which we'll talk about them here in just a little bit. But overall, I do think Stewart-Haas will stay with Ford in 2024. Obviously, they've got a lot of things they got to worry about. They've got to worry about that 10 car as well and who's going to take that. Because it sounds like at this point, Eric Almirola is going to retire at the end of the season. I imagine it will be between Zane Smith and Michael McDowell, the two front runners. I think McDowell's going to take that ride. If not those two, I look at Matt DiBenedetto, or maybe somehow Haley Dean gets a shot or an opportunity to drive that 10 car next year, or maybe Riley Herbst or Cole Custer gets an opportunity to shot. But obviously, Stewart-Haas Racing, they've got a lot of things that they've got to work on, that they got a lot of eggs in the basket that they've got to look toward for the future. And overall, it's going to be very interesting to watch and see what happens in regards to Stewart-Haas Racing's future. But it sounds like they could switch manufacturers after 2024, but they also could stay with manufacturers and not make any changes. It's going to be something interesting to watch long term, and we'll see what happens in regards to potential switches of manufacturers in the not-so-distant future for Stewart-Haas Racing, but they could switch manufacturers in the future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Spire Motorsports. Now, over the last couple months, there's been a lot of talk about teams wanting to purchase charters like Junior Motorsports and a lot of even Andretti Autosport. And we know that we want to get a charter. And some people think that they could get a charter from Spire Motorsports. Well, Jeff Dickerson recently had an interview with Front Stretch. And according to him, he says the charters for Spire Motorsports currently are not for sale. However, he does mention that Ty Dillon may not return to the team in 2024, and they're looking at current drivers. It doesn't completely surprise or shock me that Spire Motorsports doesn't want to sell their charters. Obviously, they're wanting to keep them, I think, through the next TV deal. But one of the things that needs to be asked is the 7 car is in a really good position. Who is going to take that 77 car if they do end up getting rid of Ty Dillon at the end of 2023? Well, I think there are a couple of potential candidates who could get a shot and opportunity. We'll get into Andretti here in a second, too, on this front. But I think, the two main guys I look at are Carson Osbar and Austin Hill. Carson Osbar did make his NASCAR Cup Series debut with Spire Motorsports in the number 7 car, and he did a very impressive job before the brake rotor failure came in. Before that, he was up to 16th place and was running Austin Dillon down, who was in 15th position. Obviously, Carson Osbar, a lot of people think he could go to Xfinity in 2024, but I think he would do a really good job in the Cup Series, and I think he would do a much better job than Ty Dillon's done in the 77 car. But I also mentioned Austin Hill. Obviously, Austin Hill, a lot of rumors about his future as well. He wants to go cup racing in 2024. And I think Austin Hill would do a decent job with the Spire Motorsports team. I think he's a really talented driver. Austin Hill is one of the best drivers in Xfinity currently at the moment, and he could do a really, really good job. But there's also potential possibility that Andretti Autosport could come in and buy part of the stake of Spire Motorsports. Why did I mention Andretti? Well, obviously, there's a couple big reasons. Number one, Gamebridge. Gamebridge has been a huge partner with Andretti Autosport, I think, since the mid-2010s, and they are sponsoring Spire Motorsports for a lot of races this year. Combined this year, they'll be sponsoring Spire for 16 races. Also, Marco Andretti made his NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series debut, and guess which team he drove for? Spire Motorsports. I think Andretti Autosport could buy their way into there and maybe make that 77 car hotbed for the Andretti Autosport group. Maybe work somehow and get like their drivers like Colton Herter or Mon Grosjean an opportunity, or maybe just maybe work with a driver, upcoming talent like a Nick Sanchez perhaps, move all the way up to the Cup Series because Gamebridge has been a partner with Nick Sanchez this year with Red Racing. That could be a potential possibility that comes out of nowhere. But it is going to be very interesting, nonetheless, to see what happens in regards to the future of Spire Motorsports and what's going to happen with that team. But it sounds like at this point that they potentially could be making moves and might be getting in, not selling the charters, but they can be making some big moves because it sounds like they're building something for the long-term future. And now we're going to jump on to the first of three major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Canada. Now, over the last couple weeks, there's been a lot of rumors about Montreal potentially returning for 2024. Well, it was reported by Adam Stern and Bob Pockers, and Bob Pockers actually was one of industry reporters saying industry personnel have indicated that they have been told to get their passports ready to race in Canada as early as next year. Now, why are they being told to get their passports ready? Well, ladies and gentlemen, from what I've heard and understand, it sounds very likely that Circuit Gilles Villeneuve is going to be coming back in 2024. It's no secret after the success of the Garage 56 entry and how well the next-gen car did race in Chicago, it's no secret that NASCAR wants to race pretty much everywhere, and they want to begin going international. Now, obviously, Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, of course, that's raced for NASCAR in the past. There's been a lot of talks that basically talks from people who work with the F1 circuit, basically that they are trying to come back. Now, they have raced there in the past from 2007 to 2012. They raced there in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. And generally, the racing was amazing and absolutely incredible. And I've been saying for the last years that I've wanted to see Circuit Gilles Villeneuve come back and race. Not just for the Xfinity Series, but for the Cup Series as well. And the fact that the Cup Series is going to be coming back to Circuit Gilles Villeneuve is absolutely amazing and absolutely incredible. And technically, it is another street course because they actually are going to be racing technically on the streets of Montreal because that island is technically on the streets of Montreal. So that's another street race that'll be on the schedule as well. Now, the next gen car we obviously know has had issues racing at road courses, but I think that this track is definitely built perfectly for the type of racing that we can see with the road courses with the next gen car. The beating and banging and the racing in general, I have said, would be amazing. Now, where would this go on the schedule? Well, now there's a lot of rumors that Sonoma is going to be moved to the West Coast swing, and Circuit Gilles Villeneuve is going to replace it. Obviously, you need a track that needs to replace the Auto Club date, and I think Sonoma would definitely fit in that Auto Club date. They want to have more races on the West Coast swing, and they want to have 3 races there. You've got Phoenix and Vegas, but you want to have a race that's going to replace that Auto Club date. I think Sonoma, I've said for a long time, should be in the spring. I know the last years have been much better with the weather there, but I personally believe that they need to be racing there in the spring, and I think the racing could actually be better as well, and intensity could be up as well. And having a road course as the second race of the season would definitely make a lot of sense overall. I think this is a really, really good move. I think that moving Sonoma earlier should be great. And having the final race basically before Fox's coverage ends, so I would say I would love NBC to take over that coverage. I think the final race for the off week would also make a lot of sense. They'd have a week to come back and travel and get prepared for Nashville as well. Because I think the gateway would be before then. That's not too crazy far away from Montreal, but it's still a little bit far away. But overall, nonetheless, this would be a really, really good move. It sounds like Canada is going to be on the schedule. We're going to be headed up to Canada next year in 2024. Its schedule obviously will be announced in the coming months. From what I've heard, it will be announced sometime in August or September. So in the next few months, it's going to be announced. And Canada and Montreal sound like will be on the schedule in 2024. with Montreal coming back. I love this track. I wanted to come back for a very, very long time. I hosted races years ago, and I really hope that it's coming back. It sounds like there's a really good chance and a very strong possibility that NASCAR is going to be racing up in Canada, because there's a lot of Canadian fans who watch the channel, I think, as well, and all NASCAR channels as well. And they've got a Penny Series that's popular, and drivers like Brad Keselowski, Jeff Gordon have said they wanted to come back. It sounds like there's a really good chance it will come back in the 2024 season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story in today's episode, as we are talking about Corey LaJoie. Now, I did do a big breaking news story in regards to this, but I'm going to do a little more follow-up in regards to this. So, according to Jordan Bianchi from The Athletic, he reported this on Monday, that Corey LaJoie is finalizing a multi-year contract extension with Spire Motorsports. It's unclear how long the deal is, but I would imagine it'll be at least a 2 to 3 year extension for Corey LaJoie. Now, something interesting to know when it comes to Corey LaJoie, there actually were some pretty big teams that were trying to pursue Corey LaJoie for 2024. Now, who could these teams be? I look at teams maybe like Trackhouse Racing. We always talk about this when we had the silly season rumblings from Jordan Bianchi, but basically Trackhouse was talking about maybe expanding to 3 full-time cars, and I think that they were looking maybe at Corey LaJoie. That's the next driver that said they want to give a shot and opportunity top-tier equipment. Now, Corey LaJoie, I think so far in 2023 has been really, really good. Obviously, we were going to give him a little bit of hell for how bad his performance was at Gateway, but they didn't have S&T data due to lightning and the weather delays. There's also Hendrick's worst racetrack on the schedule, and they've struggled there. Hendrick Motorsports has. And also, Corey LaJoie was basically overshooting it, it was last-minute notice, wasn't given a lot of notice toward it, was last minute, so he didn't really get a chance and opportunity to prepare for that. But when you look at Corey LaJoie with Spire Motorsports this year, I think he's done an amazing and really good job in the 2023 season. I think he's like 23rd or 24th from points. He's gotten a couple top 10s, and I think even occasional top 5 or 2 top 5s this year so far. And I think Corey LaJoie knows that Spire Motorsports is building something. We obviously know Andretti Autosport, there's been rumors that they could buy their way into Spire Motorsports in some sort of capacity. With Gamebridge coming in, with the funding being there, I certainly think the funding won't be an issue for Corey LaJoie long term. And overall, I think that Corey LaJoie knows that this team is building for the long-term future. And I think Corey LaJoie, over the next couple of years, especially with this being a multi-year deal, because he doesn't have to basically worry about someone coming in and taking his ride for 2024, I think building around Corey will be a huge thing. Now, obviously, I said that they should downsize from 2 cars to 1 car, but it sounds like they're going to have 2 cars in 2024, so they need to figure out what they're going to do with that second car. Bring someone like Carson Osbar or Austin Hill in and get rid of Ty Dillon, because like I said, I don't think Ty Dillon has done a good job with Spire Motorsports this year, and I think they need to get someone in there who can make that 77 car a lot better, which I think Carson Osbar or Austin Hill are the 2 drivers that I would look at, or maybe somehow they get someone crazy like Carl Leverson out of nowhere and put him in that car. I think that's a crazy one, but anything's possible at this point. But like I said, going back and talking about Corey LaJoie, I think the longer Corey stays here, the better he's going to get with this team. They've been building this team up, and I do believe that this team could make the playoffs in 2024. I know that's crazy to say, but this team is taking huge steps forward in 2023. Corey LaJoie was in playoff contention really up until about 2 or 3 races ago, and he still's got a shot. I think he's within a mathematical chance of making it. He's likely going to have to win a race at this point, but I think Corey LaJoie has been very impressive so far in the 2023 season, and I really hope he continues to really help Spire Motorsports become a much better team and a bigger team overall. They're building towards something. I was really skeptical seeing from the beginning in 2019, but I think they've really, really proven themselves as an organization. They want to do this. They've been taking big moves. They got Steve Letarte about a year or 2 ago, and overall, I think this is a huge move for the team, for Corey to stay long term. I think he's going to do a really, really good job, and honestly, I'm so pumped that Corey LaJoie is going to be sticking with Spire. I know that it would have been really cool seeing him at teams like Colleague or Trackhouse, but overall, I think it was a great move to see that Corey LaJoie is going to stick around with the Spire Motorsports group long term. I consider Corey LaJoie to be one of the more underrated drivers, and I think some drivers do perform better when they don't have to be at a top-tier team. Some drivers do really, really good as an underdog because they always get the best out of themselves, and if you put them in top-tier equipment, they may end up struggling. I think Corey LaJoie is a perfect example. You put him in an underrated car, a car that is, I think, really underrated, and he does a very good job and gets the best out of that car. So nonetheless, I'm excited for the long-term future. I'm glad to see that Corey LaJoie is going to be sticking around with Spire Motorsports long term, at least for the next few years. Again, I expect it to be a 2 or 3 year extension through 2026, which I think Corey will be about 35 or 36 by the end of that extension, and maybe then he'll move on to another team. But I think right now at this moment, you got to keep Corey LaJoie around long term and build around him. hopefully they can do that because I think Corey's done a really good job with the Spire Motorsports group since joining the team. Hopefully he sticks around for a long time, maybe finish his career with Spire, maybe just maybe they'll make the playoffs in the not-so-distant future. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Busch Beer. Now, obviously, the worst kept secret had been going around the industry, but it's officially announced yesterday that Busch Beer will join Trackhouse Racing in 2024 and will sponsor Ross Chastain. Now, according to it, it will be a multi-year deal. Unclear how long the deal is, but I imagine it's at least a 2 or 3 year deal with Trackhouse Racing. And they're going to sponsor each season with Ross Chastain for 18 races each year in 2024, which also confirms that they will be leaving Stewart-Haas Racing at the end of the 2023 season and moving, like I said, on to Trackhouse in 2024. Like I said, this has been the worst kept secret in the industry. They were basing Victory Lane. Ross Chastain won a national a couple weeks ago, and it's no surprise and no shock that they are going to be sponsoring Ross Chastain. And it does make a lot of sense. But Busch Beer obviously basically works a lot of things. Even though we had the Bud Light controversy end up happening, they work with a lot of drivers and have worked with people that basically kind of had that up-and-coming swing. And you think about from a few years ago, too, when it comes to Ross Chastain. A few years ago, that driver was struggling for funding and sponsorship in 2018, 2019. He lost his ride with Chip Ganassi in 2019 Xfinity because of DC Solar stuff and didn't have sponsorship or funding. Now, he's got big sponsorship funding, and Ross Chastain's story, from Rags to Riches story, has been absolutely incredible. Just 2-3 years ago, he was racing in the Xfinity Series, recall, and even 4 or 5 years ago, was racing for teams like JD Motorsports. Then in 2021, goes full-time with Chip Ganassi Racing. Had some pretty decent success with that team, though it wasn't as good as Kyle Larson was in that car. But then in 2022, goes to Trackhouse and wins 2 races and is competing for a championship and has already in 2023 scored a win earlier this year at Nashville. And I think Busch Beer sees a lot in Ross Chastain. And from what I understand, this deal had been probably done for a very, very long time. But they were waiting for the right moment and right time and right opportunity. And I think they're absolutely seizing the right moment and right time and right opportunity as well to work with a driver like Ross Chastain. It makes a lot of sense. He's known to drink some Busch as well, and overall, I think this is a fantastic move for him. I can't wait for that. Obviously, they're saying that there could be some watermelon-flavored cars in the future, and I really think there could be some watermelon-flavored Busch Beer in the not-so-distant future as well, which I think that would be really, really cool and really, really awesome for the future of this team. And it's really good for Trackhouse as well in a sponsorship because they've been getting a lot of sponsorship, but I think at Trackhouse, they're probably one of the most innovative teams in the last 20 years. We've seen him make a Project 91 car where basically they had drivers come in, international drivers, been successful in other forms of racing, come out there. And we saw Shane Van Gisbergen most recently just win with that team. And that's why drivers like Brody Gesicki are going to be racing later this season. And then you think about others that are getting up, things that have happened with this team. You've got Pitbull coming into play, who basically bought up. And we've seen the brand of Trackhouse grow and grow and grow, and the innovation is absolutely incredible, and they're building toward a very long-term future with 2 great drivers. Chastain's there long-term. He's a long-term project with the team, and overall, I think Chastain will continue to be successful. He will not have to worry about sponsorship anytime soon, and it's crazy to think that these 2 guys, the guy that basically Chastain's taking the sponsorship from, is the guy he had trouble with in 2018, but they basically both are on good terms nowadays. Now, let's get to the other side of the situation with Stewart-Haas Racing. Obviously, Stewart-Haas Racing has lost a major sponsor with the 4 car, which is not surprising. They were really associated more with Kevin Harvick than anything else, but they've been with Stewart-Haas Racing since 2014 when Kevin Harvick joined the team in 2014. And they've had a lot of success with Stewart-Haas Racing. They also had sponsored Clint Boyer from time to time as well. But it really is disappointing here that they're going to be leaving Stewart-Haas Racing because now you're losing 2 big parts of SHR. Might lose a 3rd part with Eric Almirola, and that could leave the Smithfield leaving Stewart-Haas Racing. And Stewart-Haas Racing needs to look toward the long-term future on who are they going to get in the 10 car next year in 2024 because obviously rumors are that Eric Almirola is going to retire at the end of the season. But it's really disappointing for Stewart-Haas Racing overall. They've lost a major sponsor. And SHR, I think, is in a lot of trouble. I think it's very similar to what's going on with RFK before they became RFK. With Roush when they were in the mid-2010s, they were struggling. They were losing big sponsors. They're losing big drivers. And they're losing big funding. And that's what happened to the team. And they fell off. Stewart-Haas Racing is in a similar position. I think Shane Van Gisbergen would be a great pickup for Stewart-Haas Racing if we got him because I think it could be a stabilization for the team. But I think when you look at this move, it's a bad move overall to see that this ended up happening. But nonetheless, great to see Busch Beer going to Trackhouse Racing. This is a huge move for this team long term, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen long term with Busch Beer coming into play. It would have been definitely cool to see him sponsor Kyle Busch next year, though, especially with the 8 car. We could have seen the legendary Budweiser car, even though Teresa probably would have sent lawsuits out to them. I think it definitely been really, really cool to see them come into play and sponsor them as well. But nonetheless, this is absolutely huge. This is great for Trackhouse Racing. Happy for them. It's huge disappointment for Stewart-Haas Racing. They got to go back to the drawing board. I would imagine that some of the companies that work with Josh Berry, that being Tire Pros, even Bass Pro Shops, people say that's a Junior Motorsports on, but they sponsor multiple different drivers, and they are sponsoring Tony Stewart in the SRX as well. So I think that Bass Pro could have an opportunity to work with Stewart-Haas Racing in 2024, maybe with Josh Berry, maybe Hunt Brothers Pizza, maybe other companies like Mobile One could come into play as well, sponsor Josh. But nonetheless, a huge loss for Stewart-Haas and a huge win for Trackhouse Racing to pick up Busch Beer. So, that is good for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on us when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as Sportman Patreon as well. Links description below that, and comment your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts about Busch Beer going to Trackhouse Racing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about NASCAR potentially going to Canada and LaJoie likely returning to Spire Motorsports long term? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I don't know if I'm having more videos on the channel later today. We'll just have to wait and see and play it by ear. Tomorrow we're going to have race picks for the Cup Series race in New Hampshire for the Crayon 301. Friday and also the SRX race is coming out tomorrow night as well. Then on Friday we'll have a NASCAR news video on the channel as well. Then on Saturday, we'll have the race review for the Cup Series Xfinity race at New Hampshire. And then Sunday, I will say this, I will likely not have NASCAR Cup Series race review pending the weather. The weather's actually been getting worse. There's a 70% chance of rain. It might end up getting delayed. If it does get postponed, you might see a video at the baseball game. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.